and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Roger Gibbons. I'm a member of the Herts and Middlesex Committee. I'm a member of the European Butterflies Group and a member of that committee as well. This talk tonight will be very much a meander through some of the more intriguing aspects of butterfly life. And I'll say at the outset that I don't pretend to be an expert on this subject. I volunteered to give the talk, and I'm aware that there will be a number of people in the audience that will know more about the subject than I do. In researching this, I've endeavoured not to cover the same ground as was given in Martin Warren's excellent talk, so there's very limited overlap here, I hope. And when I started to look into the topics, I had a distinct feeling of falling into a rabbit hole where things got curiouser and curiouser. And it seems to me that there are more questions than answers, but I'll ask a number of those questions tonight. But I hope that this talk will be interesting, maybe thought-provoking. Anyway, we start at the beginning. We start literally at the beginning, 350 million years ago. Prior to Pangaea, there were 4 continents: Laurentia, Baltica, Siberia, and the magnificently named Gondwana land. And they converged about 350 million years ago to form Pangaea. And that's when the first insects appeared. And during the existence of the single landmass of Pangaea, that's when butterflies first emerged. Pangaea started to break up about 130 million years ago. It's amazing how we just toss 100 million years around as if it was nothing. But the existence of Pangaea tends to explain why related species can be found all around the world. In fact, identical species which were clearly in existence before Pangaea broke up into separate land masses. Those distributions were as a result of land masses and climatic changes. And the first butterflies were with wings, with scaly wings, Micropteroidea. Hello? Are we, sorry, is somebody asking a question or not muted? These primitive butterflies evolved from caddisflies, Trichoptera, around 200 million years ago. And there's an image of them bottom left. And they had mandibles rather than proboscis, and some 20 genera of these Micropteroidea still exist today, and there's about 180 species, but they're the living extant forms of these early butterflies. Species that were more like today's butterflies with proboscis evolved about 130 million years ago. They were originally more like moths than butterflies, and they coincided with the first appearance of flowering plants, angiosperms. This is my first question, really, is how did nature manage to synchronize the development of proboscis in order to reach into flowers and access the nectar with the occurrence of flowering plants? The fossil record says that the first butterflies occurred about 130 million years ago, but DNA studies suggest it's 200 million years ago. And the first butterfly fossils date from about 100 million years ago. But it's one of the first questions that struck me on reading up on this is how did the mandibles evolve to proboscis to enable them to access nectar? On to some elements of butterfly behaviour. Start with migration. Two great migrants are Painted Lady and Queen of Spain fritillary. They're highly migratory. Most species are relatively sedentary, and they are limited to within about 1 kilometre, basically because it's not energy efficient to go wandering around looking for new habitats, whereas they tend to concentrate their energy on egg laying. The migrations often in predetermined paths, and they what we feel is true is that they tend to follow rivers and other landmarks, and in some occasions even roads. With regard to the painted lady, taking that as our sort of prime example of migrants, the largest recorded migration of painted lady was in California in 1924, when it was estimated that 3 billion actually migrated. I think we can probably all remember quite well the last UK migration in 2009, when an estimated 11 million reached the UK. Apparently they got as far north as Dumfries. I'm not quite sure how that worked. I mean, did the leader of the group say, I've studied this on Google Earth, that's Dumfries, chaps, this is as far as we go. But apparently elsewhere on the continent, they also reached the Arctic Circle. But the ones that reached Britain weren't necessarily the ones that left the breeding grounds in the foothills of the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. They were the second, third, fourth, fifth generation. But my next question, and there are a lot of questions dotted around here, is when these second and third generations emerged, how did they know to continue migrating? And if they did, how did they know to continue migrating northwards? It's estimated, and these are obviously very general estimates, that 26 million in 2009 actually returned south in the autumn. And research carried out by Rothamsted Experimental Station in Harpenden actually found something rather strange, is that when they returned south, they did so at an altitude of around 500 meters, which is above the radar monitoring for bird and butterfly migrations. So previously it was really unknown as to whether or not painted ladies came here, enjoyed an English summer and then died off. But now it appears that they certainly did return south, although quite how far they got is debatable. Another element of the research by Rothamsted is exactly how they manage the migration, because it requires an awful lot of energy. And one of the things that they discovered was that the energy source that they were using was in the form of lipids, fat in the form of lipids, which is high energy and low mass. On to predation, and I'll focus on the adult butterflies, because predation in the larvae and ova was very effectively covered in Martin Warren's talk. But the focus of butterflies is on survival, because the adults only exist to continue the species, and mating takes place immediately on emergence of the females. And even so, only about 2% of the eggs actually reach adult butterflies. There are a number of predators that prey on adult butterflies, probably not so much in this country, but certainly in southern Europe, where you have birds, spiders, wasps, dragonflies, crickets, mantises, and lizards. And there are threats at all stages of the life cycle by parasitoids. But just to clarify that the difference between parasites and parasitoids is that parasites just live off the host and don't actually kill it, and parasitoids feed off the prey and do eventually kill it. And I put here some examples of the parasites and parasitoids. Top left, it's not a terribly good photo. It's a robber fly which has wrapped up it's in southern France, a southern marbled skipper. And this was rather disappointing, because there were actually thousands of butterflies of many different species flying at that location. And the robber fly managed to catch the only one that was extremely rare and kill it and wrap it up. One of the major predators is crab spiders, which sit in flower heads, and they can change color to match the color of the flower. And that's my next question, is I really don't understand how they manage to do that, but they're very well concealed. And the large white on the sort of middle row there, if you see the left-hand photo, you can see the head is at a rather strange angle. And I've blown it up on the one opposite, and you can just see the crab spider underneath. and it's already been caught by a crab spider. And I see an awful lot of butterflies caught by crab spiders, or actually in the process of being caught by them. And it's fairly clear that once the crab spider's got it and injected its poison, the butterfly has no chance at all. Butterflies also get caught in the webs of the larger orb spiders. Generally, the smaller butterflies have no escape, but I have seen larger butterflies that have struggled and have actually managed to escape. And it's said that some of the scales are detachable, and that helps their escape. And I think we all know very well the story of the small tortoiseshell and the parasitic fly Sturmiabella. Sturmiabella preys on a number of venetid species, but it seems that small tortoiseshell is its primary target, and it may be that that just happens to coincide with the development of the Sturmiabella eggs, and the small tortoiseshell is just unlucky. With regard to parasitic mites, these are literally parasites. I think we've probably all seen them on the body of butterflies, on the thorax and abdomen. There's one top right here on an Erebia ringlet, and they basically prey on the body of the butterfly, but they don't actually kill it off. Presumably they're sucking some blood or some form of liquid from the butterfly's abdomen. But obviously, if a parasitoid is too successful, then their numbers are damaged as well. Just at the bottom, I put, it's not necessarily a parasitoid, but a picture of a marbled fritillary on the left. And if you look at the proboscis on the bottom right, it's got a number of very unusual attachments. And I've tried to find out what these are. I haven't really found a satisfactory explanation, but it would appear that these are probably the pollen sacs of milkweed. And this is just a mechanism that the milkweed flower uses to cross-pollinate, using the butterfly to carry pollen. Basically, everything has a survival value in the butterfly world, and they need defense mechanisms. One of the key defense mechanisms, and I'm looking here principally at European species where the threat of predation is much greater. Top left, we have Dusky Heath, which is related to the large heath and small heath. It's of the same genus. And these have these number of ocelli, one on the forewing and a number of them on the hind wing. And these may well have survival value in that they fool predators into believing that this is the head end. And this might seem like rather a fanciful notion. I mean, the predators will attack at the head end because they always endeavor to make one bite to disable the prey so that they can munch through them at their leisure without a struggle. And it might seem a fanciful notion that this is a defense mechanism, but it's surprising, especially in southern France, how many of these you actually see with a V shape taken out of the hind wing. And obviously, if the butterfly is going to have a bite taken out of it, it would much prefer to be at that end and not at the other. And it has been shown in studies that the existence of these ocelli has some sort of defense, and birds are deflected from attacking when they see the ocelli. And some very early species of butterflies, going back many millions of years, also had ocelli, so that may be crucial to their survival. Probably the best example of ocelli is the peacock, where it flashes its wings open and shows these very large, colourful eye spots on all four wings. And apparently they have carried out studies to show that when the peacock flashes like that, birds are deterred from attacking. The next form of sort of defence is the false tails, and just below those two in the middle row, I've got scarce swallowtail, and on the right you can see how long the tails are, and they're very, very similar to antennae. They're long and thin and clubbed at the end and lighter in colour, so they are very good decoy antennae. And again, this is a case where the butterfly would like to have the attack centered rather than at the head end. And on the left, you can see that there is something has clearly taken a clean break of the left-hand tail there. And you do see this quite frequently. And on the bottom line, bottom left, I don't take many photos of damaged butterflies, but you actually have a swallowtail there, and you can see that the right-hand tail has been chopped off. Again, a rather confused predator must have wondered why its prey had flown off. I'll just mention, obviously colour is a very useful defence, and the yellow and black of swallowtails is a mechanism that deters predators. But one question that I've never been quite clear on is that when butterflies are sedentary, when they're not moving, especially in mating, they're very much at risk from predators. And some species, such as Venesids, are very secretive, and others, such as blues, are have no problem in mating out in the open. But that doesn't seem to be particularly damaging to their numbers. You don't see a lot of predation of mating butterflies. But bottom right, I've just put it because it apparently is quite a rare sight, is a mating pair of swallowtails. Defense mechanisms. Camouflage is obviously a key defense mechanism, especially when they're roosting. And here we have the two broods of the comma, and the undersides of those broods are very well matched to the nature of the foliage in which they're roosting. In the summer brood, more brighter coloured leaves, and on the right, dark colour matching the leaves of trees in winter. On the middle row, we have mimicry, I think what's called Batesian mimicry, of mimicking the colours of a known poisonous species. The question that occurs to me there is, how do the predators know that the monarch itself is a poisonous species? Bottom left, just a query here with regard to roosting, is that whereas most species roost in dense foliage to conceal themselves from possible predators, a number of species, especially blues, tend to roost out in the open, head down, about 30 centimetres above the ground. Doesn't seem to, they're quite conspicuous, so they're not actually concealed from predators, but it may well be that the danger overnight roosting is from ground feeding predators such as mice, etc. And because they're 30 centimetres or so above the ground, they're safe from them. Bottom right is a butterfly called a clouded Apollo. It's one of 3 Apollo species that occur in Europe. And as you can see, the abdomen is rather enlarged and it's white, not the black you'd expect. And this is a female. And the reason for this is that it's actually, it's a device called a sphragis. And it occurs because after mating, the male will spray the abdomen of the female with a liquid, which then hardens into a sort of almost a shellac type of substance, which prevents the female from mating with any other males. And it's really hard to see what survival value this could have. Maybe the only thing you can think of is that the first male to reach the female is the sort of the way that nature should work, and that having the sperm of the first male diluted by a male that reached the female second isn't what nature intends. But it's hard to see how this could help the survival by preventing the female from mating again. I won't cover the larvae because that was covered by Martin Warren, but some larvae have these extensible horns, notably swallowtail with its osmeterium, which can emit foul-smelling liquid. And some larvae deliberately consume fungus on grasses. I think they consume the ergot fungus, which can cause really bad reactions in mammals. I think the marbled white is one that deliberately does this. They don't seem to suffer too much from predation as adult butterflies, so maybe this is effectively a defense mechanism. This is just a close-up view of the Proboscis. This is actually a two-tailed pasha. Obviously doesn't occur in Britain, it's very much a tropical species, but this is the best close-up I've got of the Proboscis. And the Proboscis is actually two tubes which are combined. There are little hooks that hook the two together. They can be separated for cleaning purposes. Sorry, I'm getting some sound here. Are people asking questions, or if not, I'll carry on. The Proboscis is basically, as I say, it's made up of two channels which combine to form a tube, and they're amazing at the speed at which they function. And here I've got a small video of about a 20-second video of a two-tailed pasha helping itself to a little bit of rum, which we spilt on our patio in France. But it just illustrates the speed of the Proboscis. This is in real time. The background noise you can hear is strimmers. That's the Symphony of Southern France, I'm afraid. But you can see the speed at which it moves. Next, in terms of the physiology, on the male forewings, there's the Androconia, or the Androconial Scales, which are the sex glands which emit pheromones to attract females. And that just shows that it's said that on Chapman's blue, which is very similar to the common blue, that these are raised areas and they're slightly furry and they're slightly different in colour. I never quite see that, but that's where they are. That's where they're supposed to be. And on the high brown fritillary, for instance, they're in this area, in the enlargement of veins 2 and 3. And that's one way of actually telling the difference if you're in a location where the high brown and dark green fritillary occur together, is that the enlargement of the veins on the male high brown fritillary are like this, but that's not the case on dark green fritillary, where they're not enlarged. The scales get their colouring from chemical pigments such as melanins, which are drawn from they're developed by the larva during the larval stage, and they're the result. They produce all of the colours of the scales. There's also a layer of larger structural scales which overlay these pigmentary scales, and they're sort of laid in the form of, as far as I can see, in the form of roof tiles. And these scales that overlay may be of a different colour, or they may be transparent. On the bath white bottom left, the black scales are overlaid with yellow scales, and that gives it a rather green appearance, but in fact there's no pure green scales there at all. And it's my understanding that the blue colour, the colour of blue butterflies, isn't pigmentary scales, it's actually a function of the structural scales, and that they function by refraction and diffraction. And this is the reason why the purple emperor has this sort of flashing effect according to the angle of viewing. Also, I think Martin Warren mentioned this in his talk, some of these scales can be in the UV range, and this is only visible to other butterflies, not to humans. Just looking now at the antennae and the antennal club. And I have to say, the more I looked into this, the more it sort of almost boggles the mind. The antennal club is its main purpose is for pheromone detection, especially for mating, so that they can use chemical means to identify the species, because sometimes visual determination can be unclear. And these antennal club contain thousands of sensors, and they're also apparently the key element to navigation. And I think butterflies that lose an antennae now become completely at a loss. They can't function at all. And it would appear from what I've managed to derive from looking at Painted Lady reports is that they can actually use the Earth's magnetic field to aid navigation, and the antennae contain a timing mechanism, and they can actually make compensations for the position of the sun. Obviously, it's vital that the antennae are kept clean, and I think we've probably all seen them where they've been scraping the antennae of any debris on their legs to keep them clean. In nearly all cases of butterflies, the antennae are very close together and clubbed at the end. Skippers, as we know, less so. And in this sphere, burnets are not dissimilar to skippers. So actually the boundary between butterflies and moths with those two groups is rather blurred. And when I sort of looked into the eyes and the nature of the eyes, they are spherical compound eyes, and they each have 10 to 15,000 light receptors to give almost 360-degree vision, which is so they can spot predators coming from almost any direction. And given that insects have 6 legs, if you've noticed that nymphalid species and some satirids only appear to have 4 legs, and I wondered about that. And when I looked into it, I found out that actually the front legs are very small, and they do exist, but you have to look very closely to see them. They're just not evident. Just a word on the physiology on the wing venation. The wing structure of all butterflies is fundamentally the same, although in some cases the wing size and shape can vary quite dramatically. I've noticed this in particular on wood whites. The veins are made of keratin-like material, and all of the veins emanate around from the cell, which you can see on the illustration there, which I borrowed with permission from Tristan Lafranchi's book. All of the veins emanate from the cell on both the forewing and the hindwing. And the vein structure is on all butterflies is pretty much the same. And it's a convenient notation to identify the sort of the various marks, in that you can identify the veins and the spaces in between. And also they're generally on the underside in 3 bands: the basal band nearest the body, the discal band in the middle, and the marginal band towards the edge. So if you want to describe a particular spot, like the spot in discal S2, that's a very convenient notation. And the butterfly you can probably see there, I can't actually see it because the sort of details of zoom is obliterating it, is actually a carline skipper, a relative of the grizzled skipper. No problem in identifying the grizzled skipper in the UK because there's only one, but there are some 20 or so in Europe, and the position of the underside marks is usually critical in identifying them. Next, on temperature control, butterflies have a very specific temperature requirements. They have no internal mechanism of regulating their temperature. So they have to use basically behavioral strategies. That's rather a sort of scientific way of saying that they angle on or against the sun in order to maximize or minimize the amount of wing area that's exposed to the sun. Good example of how this might be a problem is that The mountain ringlet, which is one of the two Erebia species we have in Britain, mountain ringlet and Ethiops, they both have, they're both altitude species. Sorry, Ethiops is Scotch Argus, have very specific temperature requirements. Many of these Erebia ringlets occur at different altitudes, largely for temperature reasons. And the mountain ringlet in Britain has a very limited range. And I think that research has been carried out over the last 20 years or so that shows that its range is, its altitude is increasing in order to maintain the temperature it needs. And it may well be that in another 20 years, it'll run out of altitude and become extinct. So I think global warming may kill that off. Also, if butterflies get too hot, they dehydrate. So they often need to take in moisture from the ground, which is often is true not only for the males that you often see on the ground taking salts, but quite often you see females on the ground in hot weather taking moisture. Another mechanism that they use to avoid excessive heat is aestivation or summer hibernation. Some species that I've noticed in southern France emerge in June, but you don't actually see them during the summer, and they seem to re-emerge in September where the temperatures drops a little. Butterflies basically are cold-blooded, and if they're too cold, they can't fly. The problem is that with predators, they need to be mobile pretty quickly because of the dangers of predation. And in the morning, they sit with open wings, maximize the area open to the sun, quite often on stone, which reflects back the heat from the ground. So they maximize the amount of heat intake. I think we've all seen sort of nymphalid species like peacocks and red admirals that are actually appear to be shivering with their wings closed. And I believe the reason for this is that it creates friction to warm up the thorax muscles so that they can get to flight as quickly as possible. And as the day becomes warmer, if they need to regulate their temperature, they do this by either opening or closing the wings. And that not only do they open and close the wings, but they will also angle onto the sun. If they angle directly onto the sun, they offer the sort of minimal area which the sun can hit. And if they want to warm up again, especially species that only settled with wings closed, then they will turn 90 degrees onto the sun to maximize the sort of the area. And they also use mechanisms sometimes of sitting with a V shape, which apparently maximizes the sort of the heat and keeps that maximum amount of heat in. So it seems to be a sort of a halfway stage between completely open wings and the V shape holding the heat in. Just looking at the sort of taxonomy and subspecies and other elements, I've taken here an example of the two species of clouded yellow, Bergers and pale clouded yellow, which occur on the continent. Pale clouded yellow has been a very rare migrant to Britain, not so for Bergers. These are of the family Pieridae of the genus Coleus. And the science of taxonomy is called cladistics, or the study of common ancestors. And they do this by analysing, or the taxonomists do this by analysing different elements of the species, such as the leg spines, eye structure, and the wing venation, and more recently by DNA to determine the correct taxonomic reference for species. And they're continually debating this, and they're always saying this is the final taxonomy, and give a few years later they all get together and change it yet again. But one good example of this is the Bergers and the pale clouded yellow, which are undistinguishable on exterior characteristics. And people will say that the apex of the pale clouded yellow is slightly more pointed, but there is sufficient variation in the wing shape of both species to make that somewhat unreliable. The only way you can really tell the two is to rear them, and the larvae in the final instar are below each species, and you can see they are very different, and they use different larval host plants, and that's the only way you can tell them apart. And in fact, they were not known as different species until 1947, when Berger actually determined that Berger's clouded yellow was a different species. And it said that all the photographs of pale clouded yellow in books before 1947 are in fact Berger's. One thing that puzzles me is the fragmented distributions of a number of species in Europe. And I've got two examples here, which I find are especially puzzling. Top left, cranberry blue, which, as you can see, is a close relative of silver-studded blue in the same family, same genus. And the distribution map of the cranberry blue shows that it's alpine and certain areas of Central Europe, but then in Fennoscandia. But in the Alps, it's a high altitude species, and in Fennoscandia, it's a lowland species. So is this a question of the sort of specific temperature requirement? It's not clear at all, but one wonders if its distribution was once pan-European and has now become separated, or indeed otherwise, because it is the same species and it's not a related subspecies. How did they become so separated? Even more remarkable, in my opinion, is bottom left is the Ottoman Brassy ringlet, which is an Erebia ringlet, which occurs in France, in this region of France, on Mount Lozère in the Cévennes in south central France. Only in that area. You can probably just see a dot in northern Italy in the Dolomites, but apart from that, it's in the Balkans. So my question really is, given that this is the only place it occurs, were these locations once connected? I have searched for the answer to that, and I've never found any satisfactory answer. And another species that has very highly separated distributions in Europe is the northern wall, a relative of our own wall, again in the Alps, in the Balkans, and in Fennoscandia. Just looking at subspecies now. Some of the subspecies are actually very similar, and the classification is firstly family, then genus, then species, then subspecies. And the subspecies are basically species which have evolved separately. They are technically the same species, and it's said that they don't fly together, but where the distributions meet and overlap, they can interbreed, and it's not clear to me whether they can actually produce progeny. Some of these subspecies are very similar, like this large ringlet bug, which is not dissimilar to the Aran brown, and this is the nominate form top left, and the similar with the ocelli with the eye spots, which is of the form Adite, and both fly in the Alps, but their ranges generally don't overlap. Even more remarkable is the subspecies of the sooty copper. This is the female, very similar to our own small copper. And then the high altitude form, subalpinus, this is also a female, and it is completely different from the nominate form. There are quite a lot of species that actually have separate forms of high altitude and low altitude. Genetically, they're the same, but there are a number of subspecies which over time have evolved to become determined as separate species. Again here, an example of how different some of these subspecies can be. Lesser purple emperor, the blue-purple of the nominate form, and the form Clytie, which is not uncommon. It's about 30% of the males, completely devoid of any purple scales. And just by way of variations, I have a few examples of those. This is a spotted fritillary below, a fairly normal looking female, bottom left, and a dark form, bottom right. And these are not from different locations or different altitudes. These are from the same locations. And it may well be that the sort of these particularly dark forms are as a result of clinal effect during larval development. Some examples of differences between broods. On the left, we have the comma, the first brood, Hutchinsoni, which is much lighter, and is the first brood is the brood that is produced by the overwintering, the bottom left form. Quite why it should have a special name, Hutchinsoni, when most other separate broods don't have a specific name. In the middle, we have the most bizarre example of seasonal dimorphism, the map butterfly, which occurs in northern and central France, not in Britain, although it was introduced in 1910 in the Forest of Dean by an entomologist, but another entomologist who objected violently caught them all and wiped it out. But the top form is the spring generation, Levana, which then produces the summer generation, Prausa, below. And this is the cycle that happens. Early entomologists were convinced they were looking at two separate species, and frankly, who could blame them? On the right, we have something much closer to home, green-veined white, the rather more dusky female of the early brood, top left, and the summer brood, top right, and the summer brood, bottom right, which looks very much like the small white. Some more extreme examples of aberrations here. Grizzled skipper in its normal form, top left, and next to that, the form Taurus, the rare mutation with these extended white patches, especially on the forewing. And it would appear, although I've seen literally thousands of grizzled skippers on the continent, I've only ever seen 3 of the form Taurus. But it appears that in some locations in the UK, I think in Kent, they turn out to be about 50% of the total population, and nobody quite knows why. At the bottom left, Purple Emperor, the nominate form, and the very rare form Aioli with very limited or even absent white markings. I was informed that this is actually technically not Aioli, it's actually a different name form, but I don't actually know what that name is. So as we have some Purple Emperor experts in the audience, maybe they could help on that one. And then on the right, just different forms of the common blue, the brown form similar to brown Argus, and then varying amounts of blue forms. But quite why some should be brown and some should be blue with varying degrees. Again, I haven't managed to find the answer to. And bottom right, the Adonis blue, a fairly normal female on the left, and then the blue form Sironus, which I don't think occurs in Britain, but occurs in Southern Europe, again with varying degrees of blueness, again contrasted with the male there, which is mating with. And just by way of the degree of variation, even within a single species in the same region, we have knapweed fritillary, which is close relative of Glanville and Heath fritillary, just showing the degree of variation, top left, top middle, and bottom left. And these are all the same butterfly. And on the right is an aberration with excessive melanic markings, both the upper side and underside of the same butterfly. Even more bizarre is that mating between different species does occur. It's extremely rare, even when the chemical means of identification manages to fail. But very rare is the interbreeding of Adonis blue and chalk-kill blue to produce the form Polonus. And I borrowed this with permission from the excellent UK Butterflies website. As you can see, it's got the colour of Adonis blue pretty much, and the markings of Adonis blue. Even more bizarre, bottom left is a bilateral gynandromorph of a common blue. Again, reproduced from a friend of mine who lives in France, Tim Cowles, which has the male on the left and female on the right. And it has to be said that in the days since Photoshop, there have been a number of bilateral gynandromorphs, but this one I know is absolutely genuine. Just now going on to the subject of puddling, where the males take salts from the ground. Just by way of illustration, these are a couple of male heath frituaries, and this is a brief, if I can get it started, 20-second video of two males taking salts from the ground, with a skipper in attendance. But just quite nice to see heath frituaries, which are pretty scarce here, and they're beautifully fresh, absolutely immaculate. And there is some building work going on in the background. Doesn't add to the sort of natural feel of it. Oops. And here just some images of puddling, the males taking salts from the ground, which they need for fertility purposes. Top left, we have black-veined whites, and there are about 100 males here. You know that they're all males because they're white. The females tend to have a sort of slightly brownish tinge. What puzzles me is you can probably just see that there's a skipper about to land on them. And when something comes down, and I watch this group, and when something comes down and spooks them, and they fly off like a flock of birds all at once, and they all descend on wherever the first one that reaches the ground, they all descend on exactly the same spot in the same group. Now, that can't be because that particular region is better for taking salts from the ground. I think it's just demonstrates that they just simply follow the first one to the ground and congregate around him. It's amazing how often when you find them puddling, that they puddle in groups of the same species. And I don't know if you can see clearly, bottom left, there's about 50 or so blues there. They're Idus blues, very similar to silver-studded blues, but that's the little group of Idus blues, and they all huddle together in their own little group. Top right, not many times you're going to see 6 swallowtails in a single photograph, but there's 6 in that group, with a single scarce swallowtail in the group as well. And bottom right, as part of a group that were puddling at a particular damp spot, and there were a total of some 500 butterflies puddling together, and this is the group of smaller Essex skippers that formed their own
There
little
was some
group.
puddling on Willie's field that we used to walk the dogs on last year, some meadow browns.
Sorry? There were, you saw them? Sorry, sorry, I'll continue. I think that is. Again here, this is puddling. This is a scarce fritillaria, particularly beautiful butterfly. But again, if you look at the proboscis, and this is my next question, is you look at the proboscis, it's on clearly dry stone. How, and this is in real time, what is it extracting? And the just going back to the proboscis, how it extracts anything through that incredibly small tube and how it works, I could not find any sensible answers. The only thing I could establish is that the means of suction is within a sort of small sac within the head of the butterfly, affecting the suction. I have to say, if James Dyson could find out how they do that, he could make some very small hoovers, couldn't he? Here's some elements of courtship behavior. I think we're within a couple of slides at the end now. The males emerge on average about a week before females. And again, this is a huge puzzle to me, is how do they synchronize the emergence so that the males come out first? The flight periods are spread over several weeks. And again, this is a survival element as far as I can see, is that even though the butterflies live only 2 to 3 weeks, the flight period might be 6 to 8 weeks. And this is basically a question of hedging the bets, because if they all emerged in the first 2 weeks and the weather was particularly inclement and they couldn't fly and couldn't mate, that would be very damaging for the survival of the species. Whereas if it's spread over a period of time, it maximizes their chances. The males, when they emerge, as we know very well, they assert dominance over their territory, and they will see off all comers, even butterflies twice the size, and certainly butterflies of the same species. And when the females emerge within that domain, they're mated immediately because of the risk of predation, bad weather, and also the pheromones become exhausted. So basically, for survival value, they need to mate and lay eggs as soon as is possible. We've all seen sort of courtship rituals of many butterflies, in particular the sort of spiral of speckled woods spiraling from the ground up into the trees and back again. Females, when they're already mated, can signal that they're not interested in the advances of a male. Here, top left, is a woodland grayling, a close relative of our grayling, which opens its wings and raises the abdomen to say no interest. Doesn't always work, of course. Top right is a pair of mating Mazarine blues, but even when they're mating, clearly pheromones have been emitted, and this is attracting other males. And here we've got a case, and I actually watched this in the flesh, of a male trying to batter its way into this mating pair and break them up. It didn't succeed, but it had a good go for several minutes. And bottom right, very similar, a mating pair of small Apollos, and the one that's actually trying to batter into them is the one that's sort of sideways onto us, and that is physically trying to separate the yellow female on the left and the male on the right, and it was actually trying to break them apart. Bottom left, we have a mating pair. The female's on the left, looking immaculate, and the male that looks like he's been out drinking and fighting for the previous week on the right. As a winning photo, you'd think that the male could smarten himself up a bit. And here I've got another example that I rather fortunately managed to catch with wood whites in a courtship. I think it's the male on the left is trying to get the attention of the female on the right. And hopefully this will disabuse anybody of the notion that these are dear, sweet, innocent little creatures, because about 20-second video here, another male, similar to what we've just seen with the Mazarine blues, this is in videoed, comes along and tries to join the party and does his best to batter his way in and separate them. And he's very persistent, really not keen to give up at all. I watched this for several minutes. This is just a short video, but he did in fact give up after a couple of minutes and fly off. And the two in question did finish up mating. And here's a short video of a strange courtship ritual. These are southern marbled skippers. That doesn't occur in Britain, but it's this rather strange courtship of antenna touching, which you can see them. They're on the left there on the green plant, which is Marubium vulgare, but this is about a 20-second video. This strange antennal touching. The noise you hear in the background, I think, is some sort of bird noise. It certainly isn't the butterflies. But the female is on the left, waiting to be impressed. And this is the final slide. Basically, this is just sort of finish with some some more bizarre elements of the butterfly world. This is a two-tailed pasha enjoying his lunch on dog droppings. I took this photo in southern France of this immaculate, very fresh two-tailed pasha, a huge butterfly, about 6-inch wingspan, and being a bit nerdy about getting the correct aspect ratio. And there are people in the audience who know how sadly nerdy I am about this. You have to lie flat on the ground and be directly end on, and in order to get the photograph at this angle. But for me, the butterfly is sideways on like this, but for the people walking along the path alongside the river, the butterfly is actually end on and therefore effectively invisible. And I have to say, my French is average, but I'm fairly sure that people walking past were saying, why is that man lying on the ground photographing dog poo? But I didn't think it was necessary to mention that I was English. They'd have probably said Brexit should have happened earlier. In the middle, just another bizarre photo on a lesser purple emperor enjoying, I don't know what it is, presumably some sort of glue on a tractor tire. And one of my favorite photographs on the right is an overwintered large tortoiseshell, which was reminded me of the character out of one of the Monty Python films. Is it the Holy Grail, who has his arms and legs chopped off and is still fighting? Well, this fella could still fly, and he could still chase other butterflies, even with about 2.5 wings. And just to sort of conclude, the more I looked into this, the more complex it appeared. And I can only marvel at the level of engineering, micro-engineering, that it takes to produce butterflies. And I've come to the conclusion they are unquestionably the most complex animal species on the planet. And we don't know what they need or why they do it. We have no real idea, but they certainly know, and they know what works for them. And that's part of the charm and the fascination, as far as I'm concerned. I think everybody in the audience as well. And anybody who's contemplating a PhD course, I would say there are plenty of potential topics to study out there. And that's the last slide. Thank you very much.
Well, Roger, thanks ever so much. That was a really fascinating talk. I think I learned quite a lot there. We've had, I think, a few comments and questions that have gone into the chat. I don't know if Liz is around. Are you still on the call, Liz? Maybe not. I'll just take you through some of those then. We'd had comment from Nick Keep that he'd seen quite a few painted ladies going up the East Coast main line in 2009.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, good. I was going to ask if you wanted to go take us through the questions on the chat.
Right, let's see. Right, this is after my links. Nick Keep to everyone. Definitely saw painted ladies going up the East Coast main line in 2009. I can comment there. I was stuck at the tunnel port with the train broke down, and we could see the painted ladies coming over, flying over the train and carrying on. It was quite phenomenal. It was quite an amazing sight. Brian, I'm convinced that there are many, many more toxic butterflies than we think. Orange, yellow, white, and other colours. Corinne, to everyone, sounds very probable. We tend not to know so much. And then Max, I think my favourite variation is the population of silverwash fritillary, where the females come out teal in colour, and that is tell me someone. That's
Palacina.
Yeah, I knew that. Honest, but that's a lovely colour, isn't it? Then Max again, could it be that the butterfly uses capillary action to send some of its own liquid down the proboscis to dissolve the salts and then suck it back up again?
It could be. It would have to be something like that, I think. But how it could send any liquid down, I've never seen any evidence of any liquid emanating from the proboscis. But how it could send a liquid down which could dissolve salts off completely dry stone at the speed at which the proboscis moves is a puzzle to me.
I mean, I've seen purple emperors feeding on what appears to be completely dry gravel, but we just wonder whether a dog has been along there a few days before, or something has been deposited which we can't see.
I've seen it in so many places that on stone, and the little video I had of the scarce fritillary, it's an area where sort of cars pull off at the side of the road, but there were several scarce fritillaries there, and they didn't seem to be located. They didn't seem to be seeking out anything in particular. It just seemed to be completely random where they were. And you see, I mean, there are other people who've seen this sort of behaviour, particularly in France, on completely stony ground. That there doesn't seem to be any design to it. It just seems to be purely from the stone.
It's hard to say, because I mean, a roadside lay-by or road verge might have had somebody making use of the conveniences there, but in the middle of nowhere, that's less likely, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you see them where, I mean, I've seen purple emperors on the ground in service stations in France, where you can clearly see that there has been a diesel spill. So there was something that could extract, even though it appears to be dry. There is clearly something that it could be extracting, but the diameter of these proboscis is extremely small. So what size it's actually extracting? I mean, if there's anybody in the audience that has any idea how this happens, then, as I say, if all that I could find out was that there is a sort of sac that contracts and expands in the head of the butterfly that causes the suction action. I have to say they got there before James Dyson, but quite how that affects what happens when it gets sucked into this sac and how it gets into the sort of physiology. If anybody knows.
The only other two comments were two people just thanking you. I think they probably have to leave. So, Malcolm, do you want to open it to questions?
Yeah, if anyone else would like to ask a question, then feel free to unmute and do so. Preferably not all at once. But if anyone has got a question, do they want to wave or just speak or grab attention? I can see Martin's put a comment in the chat to say heliconid butterflies send liquid down their tongue to dissolve pollen to drink the resulting liquid, which is interesting. And I guess if that species could, or those group of species can do it, then perhaps others could as well.
Yeah, I made a similar comment to the gentleman who raised the possibility that it was that fluid was secreted down and then was dissolving. I've bred heliconids in my greenhouse for many years, and it's absolutely fascinating to watch them do this. And they sit there, secrete a digestive enzyme down the proboscis, which then then dissolves pollen grains. And then a few minutes later, they suck up the solution of amino acids into their body. And that's how they get amino acids. It's how they are able to build protein. It's how they're able to live so long, 3 to 6 months under captive conditions for the life cycle of an adult heliconius butterfly. And so, but I've never read of, the kind of European species that we have doing this secretion, but as everybody's pointed out, the diameter of the proboscis is tiny, so the amount of fluid we're talking about would be absolutely minuscule, and one probably, one wouldn't be able to see it, would one? I don't know what anybody else thinks.
Well, it sounds a very, very, very plausible. That could
Plausible,
be
isn't
the it could be the mechanism that's happening.
It's plausible.
Anybody else for have we got something else in the chat?
Right. Ask or make an observation, please, Malcolm.
Yes, Nick, go ahead.
Yes, Nick. Has anyone else noticed that when butterflies get cold, they bring their antennae together and then often move them back behind their head and put them between the wings as if protecting them from the weather? And then as they warm up, they then open their wings slightly and bring them out and poke them forward again. I've noticed on occasion when I've been looking at butterflies on a day that was warm and gets colder, they start to roost and slowly the antennae come in from being extended out at about 45 degrees until they're both pointing straight forward, and then they come back over the head of the insect and between the wings. But it seems to be only some species. If you think about hibernating nymphalids, they all hibernate with their antenna hidden between the wings, don't they?
I wonder if that's two things occur to me, and I'm just completely surmising here, like I've been doing for the past hour, is that maybe that's for both for warmth and for protection of the antennae. But I'm just guessing.
Has anyone else ever seen it, or am I perhaps delusional? If no
Never
one else has
noticed
ever seen it.
I never noticed it, but it's very cool behavior.
Yeah. Roger, I was going to ask, when you talk about the cranberry blue and the Ottoman ringlets, I was wondering if there's any link between the distribution of the butterfly and the larval host plants that they use.
That's another question. I'll answer that question with a question, and that is that take a species which I guess only a few people will know here, bog fritillary, which feeds on bistort. Bistort is everywhere in sort of medium altitudes, but bog fritillary is very, very localized and very threatened in France and on the continent. So the distribution of the larval host plant and the distribution of the species are a huge puzzle. And the same is true because violet copper uses bistort, and violet copper is just as rare and just as localized. Another example of that, sorry, I'll just give a third one, is Chapman's green hair streak, which is extremely rare and localized in southern France and the Iberian Peninsula, and that uses strawberry tree as larval host plant, and an awful lot of southern central France is carpeted in strawberry tree, but the butterfly itself is extremely rare. So what the connection is between the larval host plant and the butterfly distribution is very puzzling. And the other thing I'll just throw out as well, because I'm very good at throwing out questions, is where you've got an early season or a late season, one thing I've noticed on a number of occasions is where you've got a late season, the larval host plant is out in flower in synchronization with the emergence of the butterfly. How are these two synchronized? I've been to places where looking for bog fritillary in central France, and when I got there, I saw that the bistort wasn't in flower, and I knew I wasn't going to see the butterfly. So how are they synchronized? Are they working to the same clock? Sorry, that's another question. So I'm not sure it's a question of larval.
All right, Aidan, do you want to?
Two things, I think. One, when Roger's discussing the rare butterfly and the common food plant, black hair streak in the UK feeding on blackthorn. Blackthorn's all over the place, and the black hair streak is really restricted. And you know, it's in my area in Bedfordshire, and I still haven't heard a fully satisfactory explanation as to why it doesn't spread further. And another point that I think Roger just touched on for a moment was he talked about the roosting of the blues that roost 30 centimeters above the ground and face down, perhaps to avoid mice as predators. I wonder to what extent we look at butterflies in the middle of the day and we don't think about what they're doing for all the rest of the day when they're going to avoid predators, etc. And how many things they do, which we simply don't see. And the thing that really makes me think that is if you've been watching the recent editions of Spring Watch and Winter Watch, where they've been looking at across nature reserves with night vision cameras and seeing all sorts of things that are going on at night. And I just wonder how much butterfly behavior we don't see because we just don't go out at the right times.
Yeah, there's a comment from Martin in the chat box saying that the distribution of green hair streaks in the UK is dependent on the ant species that it needs in the larval and pupal stages. Obviously, green hair streak is very widespread around Europe and has a whole host of different food plants, but very rare in parts of Middlesex. Perhaps because we've not got the right sort of ants. Sorry, Yalen, do you want to?
Yeah, can I make a quick comment about the synchrony between the plant and the insect? This is one of the issues that may be unraveling with global warming, because there are examples where the trigger to the insect and the plant are different. So one may be day length and the other may be temperature, but that over stable climatic conditions, those two things have come together. So the plant and the insect are in synchrony. But with global warming happening relatively rapidly, what happens is that they become unlinked. So one of the two that's being triggered by day length is still fixed on day length, on a day length clock, and the other one is triggered by a temperature clock, which is rapidly changing, and that can lead to problems with survival of the insect species. I mean, if you take an example, say, of hair streaks, which need the tiny caterpillar needs to coordinate its first few days of feeding with the opening of the buds of its food plant, that's obviously critical. And if the food plant is not developed enough, it won't be able to burrow into the tiny little leaf bud and start to feed. So it's things like that which are very critical and which can become unlinked with rapid changes in one of the two triggers.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably quite a lot of difference between species in terms of how variable and adaptable they are. I mean, I've been studying the small tortoiseshells in my shed for quite a long time, and I think I've had small tortoiseshells going into hibernation at any time from late June through to late October. So, different individuals in different years, but over an incredibly long period of time for and those, neither of those are like extreme outliers. There's some years there tend to be a lot going in June and July, and others years there's quite a few in August and September, but they do seem incredibly variable as individuals and from year to year in terms of when they'll hibernate, and the same for emerging. I've had ones emerging from hibernation in January and others that haven't emerged until May, although the bulk of them tend to be sort of late March or early April. But there just is incredible variation, and not just between year to year, but from one location to another. So I've had other people looking at hibernation patterns in other parts of the country, just completely different from, you know, I think, oh, they're all going in early this year, and someone in Gloucestershire says, oh no, they all went in very late this year. And some years I've got, they're all in by the end of July, and other years it's like, well, the first generation go in July, and then the second generation go in August and September, and there's just no consistency at all. And I'm sure the amount of changes in climate are one of the factors that's behind that. I mean, it may be all sorts of other things like responses to parasites and stuff, but just massive variability in the behavior patterns of you know, just one species of butterfly in the same place.
And Martin's just commented that the ant species for green hairstreak is the same species of ant as large blues. I'm not pronouncing it.
Fabulous.
Subluti.
The other thing that's puzzling about this sort of synchronization is, I mean, I spent a lot of time in France, and there's a lot of species, and they all have particular sort of flight periods, which are usually quite consistent. And sometimes if it's a particularly late season, then the early season butterflies, the ones that come out in March and April, are sort of displaced maybe 2 weeks backwards. But by the time you get to July, it seems everything's caught up. So the species that so in other words, there isn't this delay in the July butterflies.
And gatekeepers are almost consistently the same time, regardless of the
Yes.
spring or summer temperatures. But I mean, the other factor is for some of the butterflies, they do better when the birds are fledging early or late, then there's less predation, because the blue tits, Matthew Oates will always be commenting about his dislike of blue tits, because the later they fledge, the less likely they will be to have consumed all his purple emperor larvae. And the same with white letter hairstreak. I've seen trees covered in blue tits eating the larvae. Then another year when there's a really low egg lay, so we haven't got the larvae, the blue tits and the whatevers are not eating them. So again, it's so complex.
Right. Well, I think we've certainly got our money's worth tonight, Roger. Is there anybody else that's got a last question before we wind up?
No.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks ever so much, Roger. Really appreciate you giving the time, and thanks to all the audience that joined as well. As I do remember, your chance to vote in the branch photo competition, which will remain open for until the end of March, and then look forward to seeing some of you hopefully on Members' Day on April the 2nd. Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Cheerio.
Bye. Thanks, Roger.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Roger.
Thank you.